Tonight we're going to be in one chapter in Jeremiah, that is Jeremiah chapter 29. Jeremiah, the 29th chapter. We're going to be looking at a letter that Jeremiah sent to the Jews who had already gone into exile in Babylon. And in this letter, he instructs God's people what to do while they are in Babylon for their captivity, their 70-year captivity. So the title of the message is What to Do in Babylon. Let me give you a little bit of background for this message. Several years ago, I purchased a book written by Erwin Lutzer called The Church in Babylon. And the point was made in that book that our situation in America is very similar to the situation that Israel faced, or Judah, I guess we could say, when they went into Babylonian captivity, except there's a very subtle difference. The people of Judah were marched 800 miles to a foreign country where the culture was completely different than their hometown of Jerusalem and their temple that they were accustomed to, the one true living God. They went to Babylon, 800 miles away. There they encountered all the gods and the worldliness of the people of Babylon. They were uprooted and transplanted elsewhere. Now, here is how we are similar. Not that we've been uprooted and transplanted elsewhere, but that along the way in our own country, the dynamics have changed. The culture has changed over time. Here we as a nation for the longest time, we had Christianity, what many refer to as the Judeo-Christian ethic. Christianity was accepted as the norm until the last, I'd say, 30 to 50 years. And instead of us being uprooted and taken somewhere else, it's like the culture surrounding us has become the more and more godless, less recognizing of the one true God, and less respectful of those who follow God and who are Christians. Here's an illustration. Haddon Robinson, who was a preacher trainer, I had to read one of his books when I was in school. Haddon Robinson said it like this. He said, in the past, as American Christians, we always had the home field advantage. We knew that in the crowd there were those from the other team who opposed us, but the larger stadium crowd was either on our side or indifferent to our witness as Christians. All that has changed. Now we play all of our games on enemy turf. A minority is on our side, but the wider culture sits in the stands shouting hateful epithets at us and rejoicing at our losses. I think that's a good way to summarize it. And then this also from the book. He says, in Babylon, God's people had to live as a minority in the midst of a majority pagan, that means godless, culture. The Jewish consensus with its laws and the temple worship was gone. Tragically, Solomon's beautiful temple was completely destroyed, left in a heap of ruins. The Jews had to survive among pagan idolaters who had no regard for the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. 10,000 Jews trekked about 800 miles over a period of weeks and months to arrive in a strange country where there was a strange language. All the social, religious, and cultural supports they had been accustomed to were gone. Their tears of regret could not restore their previous privileges, which now were only a memory. Oh, and I did want to also include this last part because he takes us to something, the letter of 1 Peter, and he says, Christians, moving it up to not only the New Testament, but even today. Christians are a minority in an increasingly hostile culture. We are exiles not geographically, but morally and spiritually. And so Peter writes, Beloved, I urge you as sojourners and exiles to abstain from the passions of the flesh which wage war against your soul. Keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation. That's 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 11 and 12. So with all of that as a little bit of background, here is this letter from God through Jeremiah in Jeremiah 29, beginning in verse 4. I want to read down through verse 7. Now this is to the people who are already in Babylon. They've already been taken into captivity. This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to all those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Notice God is taking responsibility for their being in captivity. I took them into captivity. This is God's punishment on the people. Here's what God says to them in verse 5. Build houses and settle down. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Marry and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage, so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in number there, do not decrease. Also, verse 7, seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. So the instructions that we're hearing from God for these exiles can be, I think, easily taken across time to us now in our current situation and apply to us. There are 5 instructions from God given to His people. And the first one is what? Verse 4. Verse 5. Settle down. This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. Verse 5, build houses and settle down, plant gardens and eat what you grow, what those gardens produce. What's God saying? He is saying to His people, there is not going to be a quick fix here. This is something that's going to take time. They are going to be in Babylon for 70 years. Last week, just the chapter prior to Jeremiah 29, we read about this false prophet named Hananiah. You remember what he said to the captives? Oh, it's just going to be a couple of years. You're going to be back in Jerusalem. You're going to come back to Jerusalem. All of the stuff that gets used in the temple that got taken is going to be brought back. just a couple of years. And God said, well, Hananiah, you're a liar and you're going to die. And by the end of the chapter, he did, because he was a false prophet. But God's instruction for his people was that they were to settle down for the long haul. They were going to be in Babylon for 7 long decades. Can you imagine how dreadful they must have felt knowing that, we have 70 years of this to endure. I mean, if you've ever been in a situation that you hated to be in, couldn't you just hardly stand it? And you could just hardly wait until you could get out of it? My goodness, I know what that's like, and I'm sure you do too. But Babylon was going to be their home, whether they liked it or not. They were supposed to get to know their neighbors. They were supposed to, I'm sure, strive to have a godly influence on their pagan neighbors. And, you know, the application, again, I think comes to you and me. How are you and I supposed to live in the midst of a godless society? And many of the people we live around, they may not be mass murderers or anything, but they are godless nonetheless. They have no care whatsoever about whether there even is a God. How are we supposed to live? Well, Philippians chapter 2 gives us an answer. Philippians, the 2nd chapter, verses 14, 15, and 16. We are to do everything without arguing or complaining, so that we may become blameless and pure, children of God without fault in the midst of a crooked and depraved generation, in which we shine like stars. You and I are supposed to shine like stars in the universe as we hold out the word of life. So when people see us, they should see and notice a difference in us as we live in the world. And it will make an impact, as I think Brother Richie prayed this morning, that we would be the salt of the earth and the light of the world. You know, those are things that impact their surroundings. Salt impacts the blandness of food, and light. If we didn't have it, we would be in darkness in this room. So those things make a great difference. And when you and I live as salt and light, God uses us to make a difference in the world. So the first thing God said to his people in Babylon was, settle down. Settle down, build your houses, raise gardens, and mix with the people so that you have a good influence on them. The next thing he says in verse 6 of Jeremiah 29 is, build strong families. Build strong families. Marry, have sons and daughters, find wives for your sons, give your daughters in marriage, so that they also can have sons and daughters. In fact, God is very specific. He says, increase in number there, do not decrease. Don't let your depression, your sadness from being hundreds and hundreds of miles away from Jerusalem stop you from demonstrating your commitment to God and also just having families and raising godly families. Something to say about this, especially because we know our culture. How do you raise godly families in America at present? How do you do that? Well, one answer for sure is you probably are not, you're not going to be able to rely on the public school system to raise godly children. Sometimes you can't even trust that a private school, if you pay for private school, will do that for you. Honestly, raising godly families comes down to mom and dad, grandma and grandpa, instilling the faith in the young people. a passage I haven't read out loud to this church in a good while, but I've certainly alluded to it a lot through my life as a preacher, is Deuteronomy 6, where the scripture says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength." Deuteronomy 6, verse 6, "These commandments that I give you today are to be upon your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road and when you lie down and when you get up." Just all the time you're passing the faith on to your children. This is something that it just has to be constant. Because one thing about it, the world is doing everything it can to bombard our children with the message of current culture, which has become extremely ungodly in many cases. Ephesians 6 verse 4 says, "Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and in the instruction of the Lord." So again, it comes home. It comes to the father, the mother, and again, I'm including grandparents because many of us are grandparents and we have an influence with our grandchildren. A lot of what goes on in public schools today has to do with the sexualizing of children. And we as parents must guard against that. I think we have to deprogram our children when they come home. You know, sit down and say, "What did you hear today? Was anything strange? Was anything said?" You might even have to prompt them to answer you, because there's plenty of anti-biblical teaching that takes place. The pressing of the LGBTQ agenda. In my day growing up, it was the pressing of the Darwin evolution agenda. These days, safe sex before marriage gets talked about and pushed. And again, as parents, you know, we can't just shrug our shoulders and think that, well, my kid goes, you know, I take them to Sunday school on Sunday, or I take them to Wednesday night Bible class. They get it. No, they need to hear it from you. They need to hear it and hear it and hear it and hear it, because the world is doing everything it can to sabotage Christianity. So the second thing that God told them to do was marry and have children, and don't decrease, continue to increase. Raise your godly families there in Babylon. The third thing is in verse 7 of Jeremiah 29, and that is get involved in the city. He says in verse 7, "Also seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile." Seek the peace. That's the word shalom. And the word shalom does not just mean peace, like we often think about peace kind of being a calmness or a serenity. Peace, from the Jewish perspective, means all-around well-being. Seek the all-around well-being and prosperity of the city, the peace. How do you promote the well-being of a city, by the way? How would you promote the well-being of Waco or Robinson or Woodway or McGregor? How would you promote the well-being of a city? Well, it would be through getting involved in that place and serving in that place, doing what you can to be a model citizen out there with other people through acts of service and acts of kindness, right? I know a couple, the wife died within the last year or so, but he's still alive. He's 100 years old, maybe 101 now. Gordon and Irene Wallace in Wichita Falls. Boy, every time you went to vote, there they were. They were manning the voting, and they were doing their civic duty and helping everybody cast their ballots. They were involved. I mean, involved well up into their 90s. So they were always there making a difference. Galatians 6 and verse 10, if you want a scripture for this point, getting involved and serving. Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all people, especially to those who belong to the household of the faith. Have you ever heard the saying, when the tide comes in, all the boats float? You kind of get the idea of that? When the tide comes in, in other words, everybody benefits when the water comes in. Everybody floats. It's all good. And when God's people are out in the community doing good, it benefits everybody. Number 4 tonight. The next thing in verse 7, he says, pray to the Lord for that city, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. Can you imagine what these captives, what ran through their minds when they heard the idea of praying for the Babylonians? You know, I don't know what you could have told them to do that would have been more reprehensible, I'm sure, to their thinking. Me? Pray for them? You know, they're my enemy. But didn't Jesus teach us to pray for our enemies, right? If you want to hold your place in Jeremiah and turn to Psalms, the 137th Psalm, boy, this will show you the despicable way the Babylonians treated God's people and how they felt about the Babylonians. Psalm 137, by the rivers of Babylon we sat down and wept. These are God's people. When we remembered Zion, we remembered Jerusalem. There on the poplars we hung our harps. For there our captors asked us for songs. Our tormentors demanded songs of joy. They said, sing us one of the songs of Zion. Can't you hear the sarcasm? Oh, come on, you Jewish people. You're so happy and joyous. Why don't you sing us one of the songs of your hometown? Get that harp off the willow tree and sing us a song. How can we sing the songs of the Lord while in a foreign land? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its skill. May my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth if I do not remember you, if I do not consider Jerusalem my highest joy. Now stick with the psalm because it's almost finished. Remember, O Lord, what the Edomites did on the day Jerusalem fell. Tear it down, they cried, tear it down to its foundations. Now remember, the Edomites were cousins to the Jews. And that's how they mistreated their own relatives. And then verse 8, O daughter of Babylon, doomed to destruction, happy is he who repays you for what you have done to us. He who seizes your infants and dashes them against the rocks. What a powerful and sad and disgusting picture, because I'm sure there were mother Jews who had their babies snatched out of their arms by Babylonian soldiers and dashed their heads against rocks. And this is their way of saying in song, we can't wait until that same thing happens to you. And of course, Babylon would fade off the scene when the Medo-Persians came into power, and who knows how their people were treated in those wars. Well, again, God said to His people here to pray for the city, that if it prospers, they would prosper too. And Jesus told us to pray for our enemies in Luke 6, verses 27 and 28. Good reminder. Finally, number 5, the last thing to point out here is not in the verses we read already in Jeremiah 29, but verses we're going to read now. The 5th message from God to these exiles who are in Babylon is to remember God's promises. So go down to verse 10, Jeremiah 29:10. You guys are all sports for hanging with me this entire time. Jeremiah 29, verse 10. I want to read through verse 14. This is what the Lord says. When 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will come to you and fulfill my gracious promise and bring you back to this place. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. Let me stop right there, because that's a lot of people like that phrase. They like to you purchase it at some Bible bookstore and take it home and put it in your window above your sink. Well, that's not a promise for you. That was a promise for the Jews back then. Wow, Charlie, you just let all the air out of my balloon. Well, sorry about that. But that was a promise for the people back then. I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. Then you will call upon me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. I will be found by you, declares the Lord, and will bring you back from captivity. I will gather you from all the nations and the places where I have banished you, declares the Lord, and will bring you back to the place from which I carried you into exile. In other words, the promise is, I'll bring you back to Jerusalem. And God does. They rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. They rebuild the walls around Jerusalem, and they inhabit the city. So, and never again do you hear about idolatry among the people of Jerusalem. This is why they were taken into exile, but boy, I think they learned their lesson. They get back to Jerusalem. But what was God's admonition here? The 5th thing, if you're writing things down, was remember God's promises. God had a promise for the people that He would take them back after the 70 years. He would take them back to Jerusalem, and He would give them hope and a future. I want to close with just this little notation from Mr. Lutzer from his book. He says, I want you to think for a moment. Let's suppose that you were 40 years old when you were taken to Babylon. You survived the difficult 800-mile journey, and you have tried your best to adapt to the Babylonian culture without losing your faith. Now you hear that in 70 years the nation will be allowed to return to Jerusalem. You would be thinking, well, I'm thankful for the promise, but I'm going to die here. I'm not going to live 70 more years. I'm 40. And yes, of course, you will die in Babylon, and so will most of your family and relatives. And then he says, let's skip ahead. The children of that first generation whose parents died in Babylon did return. But in the meantime, they had lost their ability to speak Hebrew. Now they spoke Akkadian, the language of Babylon. That's why when they returned 7 decades later, the book of the law had to be interpreted to them. That's in Nehemiah chapter 8. But what about those who died in Babylon? They could die in faith, knowing that although they would not see Jerusalem again in this lifetime, they would inherit the blessings of the life to come, which takes us to Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews 11, the last 2 verses. You remember this is the chapter where all of those old Old Testament faithful men and women are named. These were all commended for their faith, yet none of them received what had been promised. God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect. All those Old Testament faithfuls died just believing God's promise. And one day that promise will be realized, not just by them, but by them and us together. That's a great encouragement, I think, for us as we bring this lesson to a close. Well, I appreciate you giving the Word of God your attention tonight. I hope I'm doing an okay job getting it across and showing us the things that God did for His people at that time and what He may do for us in our time. It's yet to be seen. We're going to sing a song of encouragement, and if anybody feels the need to respond, we stand ready to serve you. Let's stand.